Hello, this is Arcades, and welcome to a bit of a how-to video for Stormworks Build and Rescue. And yeah, I thought I'd cover something that is a bit interesting. So, I am a fan of a single rotor tail rotor design of helicopters. I like to enjoy the looks and all that. It's just a classic design for me. And what you see here is basically, for my career mode and my streams, I refer to as the Buff. Definitely kind of taken the name from the B-52 and its nickname, the Big Ugly Fat, well, I'll just say Flyer in this case. So, what I want to address is dealing with the major component they added when they introduced the new rotors a while back, a few updates back. And I thought I'd go ahead and try to cover it a little bit. At least what I went through in designing this helicopter and taking care of that particular issue. So, let's sit back, relax, have a good time, and hopefully this will help you out. Trying to find some solutions for your own problems for this. Okay. Yeah, so here's the thing. There are a number of things out there already of people who have stuff that deal with this particular issue that you can use on there. But the thing is not all of them fit everybody's use. Now, let me actually take this helicopter back to the workbench and I'll show you one said solution. Okay, so we're back here on the workbench. And so, like, an option for everybody to use, and I would highly suggest it, is, I believe this is done by Win, but the ZE helicopter gyro. I haven't updated it since I built it, and it's been a while, so he might have updated it. But this actually this works completely by itself, and will control the thing. I'm going to say, if you want to use it, it's an all-in-one package, it's nice. However, my thing is I didn't want it to handle everything. And it's a rather big microcontroller, too. I mean, not everybody's going to have room for this big thing. So some people might want to piecemeal it. You know, make a microcontroller for one part, make another microcontroller for another part. It's up to them. But we are going to focus on is countering the torque, rotor torque, that is a part of these rotor blades. So, just giving a demonstration of what we're countering. Let me disconnect my collective for a second, just for an example. Don't mind the tsunami, it's going away. Because when we get in here and into these helicopters, without a proper tail rotor effect, the helicopter starts spinning. Because you saw me disconnect the collective, so now it's just spinning. So what we want to do is counteract that. Alright, so for my particular helicopter, and what I did, and like I said, I didn't want to use that big piece of machinery, or that big microcontroller to handle it. So instead, I made a small microcontroller to handle the work. Now, when it comes to doing it, now, here's the thing we had to do. We had to acknowledge that the helicopter was spinning. We have to find a way to get the microcontroller to counteract that. And then, with the counteraction, send the appropriate data out to the tail rotor. This microcontroller is actually on the workshop. I'll leave a link to it, so if you want to check it out. So, when I went to develop this thing and start creating it, I knew that's what I mainly wanted to happen. So I'm still using it in conjunction with the standard gyro right here. You can see the settings I have for this helicopter. And the yaw of this thing goes into... I thought it went into microcontroller. It's been a while. Oh wait, that's pitch. That's a roll. Okay, there's the yaw. It goes into the microcontroller. Microcontroller does its thing and then sends out the output. And then based on how this acts, this sensor right here is your angular speed sensor. This is the one saying, hey, we're spinning. We're spinning in a circle. So what I ended up doing is the first thing I tested was just putting the angular speed sensor, straight into the collective. And that did nothing. It just basically did nothing. Well, it did something, but it didn't do enough to make a difference. Because the overall, speed of the rotation is 3 something, according to the sensor. See, I'll put it up here. And you notice it's slightly slower? But the problem is, it's reacting. So, in order for it to correct something, it has to happen. And it's not enough of a value. Well, okay, so I figured it wasn't strong enough. Well, the next stage I went to for the calculation is I ended up putting I took a function block, which these aren't that scary to use. They're not scary to use. They do take a little bit of knowledge. And I instead took this and put it into the collective. Now notice this is before I even have the controls involved. I'm just wanting something to counteract right now. To enact an all. Before I even have the controls of me actually wanting to go left or right involved. And all I did is I decided I'm going to up the ante of whatever the sensor's putting out to bring it up. So in this case, I will start with something simple, since most time they put it in turns, and it's at 0.25 on the max, so I decided we're going to multiply it by 4. So our input value, which is x, and I'm going to multiply that by 4, it automatically makes that calculation and bring it up. There is no specific reason, it was just a starting point, because I want to see what happens. And in this case, that's where we're going to go. And this is going to be repeated, seeing me launching and starting, because I want you to see the results of each of these steps as best I can. I'm not going to probably go through every little thing, but so as you can see, no change. We're still spinning. So that was a bust. So I knew increasing that value wasn't going to help any, because again, it's having to react. And because it's reacting, it has to happen for it to react. And because it's happening, the motion is carrying through, and thus it does nothing. I always refer to it as chicken and egg on my stream. You can't have one without the other, and thus this is what it is. Okay, so when I figured out that wasn't the problem, the issue was it wasn't retaining the idea that it was spinning. So I decided to get a PID involved, because I was like, okay, maybe the angular sensor needs some help with a PID. Maybe it can hold the information long enough for something to counteract it, and it creates a backwards force to bounce back and forth. It kind of worked. But it just slowed it down. And it was... So, let's grab a PID. Again, PIDs, they are difficult to use. They do require a little bit of logic, but they're not scary. They're actually pretty useful tools. I won't go over how to use one here, maybe in the future. If you do, let me know. I might cover one that cover it in a way that might make it a little simpler to at least maybe not know the advanced functions, but you can at least use it basically. Okay, so as you can see here, it gives us some default values. And I do know that the set value was basically 0. I want the set value to 0. The process value, which is the thing that's changing that I don't want to happen, is going to be from the angular sensor, because the angular sensor is what's saying, hey, we're spinning. Okay, so, and then we have the power, which I'm just going to get a constant on so you can see this. I could also tag it to the toggle switch of the helicopter turning on, so it turns on when the helicopter's on, but it only is really active when you're actually using it, so it's not a big deal. So I'm just going to have it permanently on, and then I take this and put this to the collective. Now, the initial values, I didn't have anything to work with, so I'm just going to go, 0 here, 0 here. And you'll see that, well, this, I think on Urine Winds, when I went to look at theirs, I think they do have just a PID. I didn't research it extensively, but I did end up using their values as a basis for my PID values at the partial way through. So I'm going to give them credit for that because I used theirs as starting values, but I think my values ended up being way different because I did keeping a PID. And I'll get to that in a moment. But for this right now, as you saw, I just put in a basic value. And again, yeah, so having a straight PID isn't much here. And in fact, you see it's starting to spin faster and faster. And this is generally how most of my experiments with the PIDs went at the beginning. Because most of the time it's like, yeah, see, it's getting faster, 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 faster. And then that's where you got to take into account the direction of your spin. So, so then you got to invert the output, you know, from the PID to, so it actually, because it looks like it was getting faster and faster. Okay, so let's actually get into the meat and bones of what I ended up doing to get mine to work. So I'm going to delete all this. We're going to get back and hook up my microcontroller here. Because in the end, I found out it needs a bit of assistance. So as you see here, I've got PID values, I got the rotor direction, and then I got these clamp values. Those will all be noted in the thing. Now, let me make this clear. This is one way of many you could possibly fix it. I will show another way. In fact, pretty easy, but it has a limitation. Whereas this doesn't have that limitation, but it has a different limitation. It's weird. Okay, so it requires you to fine-tune it for your specific build. And I try to give as much of that as I can. So, as you can see here, we got the microcontroller, all that. We got the PID, which I ended up setting, and I got all those values for, which are solidly big values. The big thing that made a difference for this is I ended up putting an up-down counter. And what this up-down counter did is it remembered a value that said, hey, I was spinning in this direction, so we need to remember we were spinning in this direction, but not all the time. That makes any sense. So in other words, I had to give it a way to degrade itself. So it did go down, so that way the helicopter wasn't constantly spinning to the left because the value of the up-down counter was always staying up. So what I ended up doing is setting up an increment so that as the helicopter starts spinning to the left, it goes in one direction, up, I believe, and which then would go out to the output of the... Yeah, so it would give it and send an output to the collective, excuse me, through, you know, all these processes. But the idea is that it says, hey, so when it's reacting, it reacts to both the fact that the thing is spinning, and then it reacts to the fact that says, hey, I remember that I was spinning, and you need to just calm down a bit. I'm going to keep going this way. And it brings it down to that small value so it holds it still. And that's basically all it's doing. It's just trying to remember that I was spinning to the left, and you need to hold to the left a bit. But then it degrades so it doesn't constantly pull to the left. Because if I bring that increment value of the up-down counter up or down, it starts giving the helicopter a wiggle. It's actually kind of funny with the earlier versions of it. But yeah, that was the big value. And for each of the things you do, you would have to change the increment. And then as you notice, I also cap it, or I have a clamp here, because I did not want it to go too far, because it could go all the way to 1, and next thing your helicopter's spinning like a top. Had that happen. Then I came up with the clamps, and it helped a lot. When I figured out the clamps, I put it in there. So as you can see, it's only 0.15 in either direction, that this thing will work. And that made a big difference for it. Now, the other thing with this setup that I did, and if you want to do that too, is I only actually have that counter force. It only works when I'm not putting an input in. So for example, here's my yaw input. It goes through, hits the junction, but here you have your property toggle. Okay, that's for the rotors left and right. So it goes through here, gets to the calculations, but as you can see, it still skips through all the way up to here. Now I have a threshold. Now if the threshold says I'm higher than this, in other words, when I'm hitting the button, it switches inputs. So when it's on, or when it's off, it takes the value I put in. When it's on, it takes this. And the threshold is being the spinning. Not my input, I believe. Either way, the thing is, when I'm not pressing a button, all that's working to keep it centered. When I go to hit a button to tell the yaw to do something, then it spins. Alright, let's get out of there. Now, there is one other thing that I noticed while I was researching this and trying to fix this that was also very important to the whole thing. The spin also required that the force quality of your rotor blade makes a difference. Of your tail rotor makes a difference. I think, so I'm using a light rotor here. As you notice, they have a force power. And since right here I'm using this one is 10,000. That makes a difference. Your RPS that goes into that makes a difference, because I have a different helicopter that has it on there, and it requires a certain level RPS or it doesn't work. It doesn't have enough power to actually counter the rotor on there. So make sure you have a strong enough rotor blade. Make sure you find a way for the thing to remember, hey, I was spinning and I need to go back the other way. At least that's how I solved it. And yeah, make sure you have a way to detect that you're spinning, which is like the angular speed sensor. And that should be all you need to basically, and you can make yourself your own like I did, or use my own like little rotor microcontroller to control all that. But the thing is most of this is going to probably be built to your specific machine, and you're going to have to tune it to your machine for what you're doing. And you're going to have to find controllers like mine or like Urine Winds or somebody else's to help counteract that. So, and I went through all the work because because everybody's like, just do it counter rotating. Like, no, I don't want to do counter rotating. I like my big rotored helicopter with a tail rotor. I like the design. I like that layout, and that's what I wanted, and that's what I built. And by God, I was not going to do it without it. So, all right. So here's another helicopter I have. This is kind of, it's been dubbed as my Franking copter because I ended up just throwing a whole bunch of junk on it. And it's just the old preset starter helicopter. And I've got the microcontroller up there, plus a whole bunch of other crap. And it was a trooper. It was a trooper. It is, yeah. So I'm going to bring the engine up to 15 throttle. And as you can see, my controller's doing its job. There's an issue with the roll, but that has to do with the helicopter's design more than the my controller itself. But as you can see, though, the yaw is holding steady. And you notice there's a slight wiggle. That has to come from the increments. That's what I was talking about earlier about what could happen. So yeah. Now here's the thing, and this is what I was talking about with the RPS earlier. I'll bring this down to 10. Oh, well, 12? Because I know it doesn't need as much RPS to fly as it... Okay, yeah, I think we're holding steady. But as you notice, now we're spinning around. Slightly. because the tail rotor is actually not getting enough RPS to do its job. So I have to bring it up some, and now it's doing its job. It was probably still floating down a bit, but we have this helicopter right here. If you're not sure what this is, just by looking at it, this is the enemy AI helicopter. Obviously, they had to come up with a way to deal with the the torque situation as well for these helicopters. Well, there is a solution. It's similar, but it's very limited. And it's simpler, but like I said, it is limiting. Now, how they ended up controlling it is they have, if you come here, and they have it coming through this function block. Oh, no, that's a clamp. Where's it at? Okay, so they have it through this function block simply with x plus 0.05. And this is a number you can fudge with at any time in here to make this stuff work. And the reason why it works, and it is capable of working, and this is the restriction, it requires the engine to have a constant RPS. So you can't change the RPS of the engine or it starts going wonky. So here's the microcontroller that controls the helicopter. All it has is engine RPS. There is no input for throttle control. It monitors the engine and it has an output for the throttle, but it doesn't actually have an input to be adjusted. So in order for this method to work, you have to have a solid constant RPS like they have here. So yeah, I'm hoping this explanation helped you out. I'm not sure. I know it's kind of very vague in some places, and it's hard to see without an actual, example of it working. But the best I can do in this situation, because I know not everybody, like me, doesn't want to use twin rotors, doesn't want to use counter-rotating, doesn't want to stack them, and this is my best help to give you. It's not a very easy thing to explain straight out, especially without examples, but it's hard to get those practical examples to work. So, like I said, if you can use a PID plus an up-down counter control like I did, that works well. Obviously, I got it to work. Make sure your rotors have enough RPS going to them so they can actually do proper sufficient power to actually counter the force. And and then you can use a static value on your collective as long as you have a static addition to the output, as long as you have a set RPS amount. As long as your RPS to your rotor is at a static amount, so then you can control from there. That is probably the simplest, easy way to do it, because it just requires you taking a function block and just changing it to getting to the value before it sits still. So, I hope this was informative. I hope this was helpful. If it was, and you enjoyed what you watched, you like what you saw, like, subscribe, all that fun junk. Leave a comment, helps me out in the channel. And yeah, I'm looking forward to maybe covering some more technical things in here as best I can. And tell me ask questions. Let me know what you want. Tell me what you think. And I'll do the best I can to explain it for what I can. Alright, so, yeah. So, I'm Arcades. Hope you had a good time. Hope you enjoyed what you watched. I'm signing out. Have yourself a good day.